Hello YouTube. I'm sure you've been watching what's been going on in the UK over recent weeks. A couple of weeks ago we had the March Against Hate that was organised by Tommy Robinson in Manchester, and yesterday we had another march that took place in London by the Football Lads Alliance. That was attended by around 20,000 people, lads from all different football clubs around Great Britain. Now, when you look at or attempt to find out any information in the mainstream about these groups, obviously these groups are always portrayed in a negative manner. You know, they're accused of being Nazis or fascists or in any sort of negative sense, let's say. Now, there's a very good reason for this, and that is government's one true job is to protect the people. Now, in that sense, government has failed dramatically. We've seen that over recent months and years with one terrorist attack after another, etc., etc. Now, government dare not admit to the real reason why these groups are beginning to form. Because if government was to admit that these groups are forming because government has failed in its one true job, then government would effectively be admitting that it's obsolete. You know, it's failed to do its one true job, and as such, what further use is government to the people? Of course, if it can't even protect us, then what use do we have for government? Obviously, we have none. And all the funds that government extorts from the people in one way or another in order to sustain itself, all those funds could be diverted to towards things which would be more needing of them, let's say. Now, there is a process taking place here in the background that very few people ever notice, and that is there's a cycle of responsibility here. Ultimately, all responsibility rests with the individual. It does not rest with the state. The state attempts to wrestle individual responsibility off the individual to make itself more powerful. And if the people are foolish enough to give up responsibility for their own lives and give that responsibility to government, then I'm sorry, but the state is destined to have to let you down, and to let you down in a big way. Now, there are people like Tommy Robinson and the other groups, all these people that are attending these marches, who have had enough of government. They are actually fighting to take back responsibility for their own lives from the government, because the government has failed the people. Now, as I say, the government dare not admit that's the true reason for these marches, for these groups all coming together as they are now doing. You know, you've got white people, coloured people, Asians, even now groups who have fought each other, groups from different football clubs who have fought each other over many years, you know, are marching together now, because even though the powers that be may have attempted to divide us for such a long time and have us in constant conflict with one another, so that they can go about their business relatively unscathed, as it were, even though they've attempted to divide us as they have, what's actually happened is, because they have failed us in the way that they have, government, through their failure, the people now have one true enemy, you know, and that is the government. The one entity that has failed us all is the government. You know? And it's nice to see people taking action to become the masters of their own destinies, let's say, to become their own bosses. You know, and the more responsibility people do take for their own lives, the less money they'll have to pay out to all these governmental groups. You know, government doesn't like the people to be responsible. Government promotes and wants to see irresponsibility, because in the state of irresponsibility, government can grow to an obscene size. I mean, just as a fact here, when Britain was at its most productive, many years ago, when we manufactured and exported goods to every corner of the globe, only around 4,000 people worked for the British government, compared to now, where around, I think it's 280,000 people now work for the government, in one sense or another, you know, with all their gold-plated pensions and their, where they vote for their own pay rises, the politicians, etc., etc. You know, this is the price that people have to pay for having given up responsibility for their own lives. So we've had a long process now where responsibility has moved from the individual to the state. The state has got to the point where it's now massively letting the people down, not only in this sense, but also in a financial sense as well. I mean, the way the powers that be have run the country for such a long time now has been, the powers that be are basically inept. The government is, well, the nation is bankrupt. We're now over £2,000 billion in debt, £2 trillion in debt. They're having to borrow whatever they can. They're having to keep interest rates at zero, to keep the interest on the national debt as low as possible. Every trick in the book is being played in order to keep this game going just that little bit longer. But if we're being honest, Britain is bankrupt, and there's no way it can ever dig itself out of the hole that it's now in. I mean, as well as borrowing, they're also printing up a massive amount of currency every month in order to keep paying the bills, as it were. But also by doing that, they're devaluing the currency that's already out there, and this devaluation we see reflected in rising prices. The cost of everything is going up dramatically in the UK, precisely because the government is systematically destroying the value of the money in our pockets. So, as I say, not only have government let the people down in a protection sense, but also in a financial sense. So, the collapse, when it comes, is not going to be nice, but this has to happen in order for the people to be moved to take back full responsibility for their own lives, both financial and, you know, in a protection sense. So don't be surprised had people not been as irresponsible as they are. Well, those irresponsible individuals wouldn't have to go through the coming hell that they're going to have to go through. And obviously there is time still to protect yourself from the coming collapse. Obviously store food, exchange your ever decreasing in value currency for something more able to protect you over the long term, let's say, for instance, gold and silver. You know, there's other things you can buy, obviously, in order to protect your purchasing power, to protect your hard-earned savings from the destructive actions of government. There's various ways, but yeah, ultimately that's what's going on. Government dare not admit that these groups are forming now because they've had enough of government. Government has failed us, and the people have had enough. Government dare not admit that, because to admit that would be to effectively admit that they are now obsolete. I can't see things, improving much in the future. This process has to unwind. Things have to get back to being as they really ought to be. It's taken a long time for things to get into the terrible state that they're in now, and as such, it's not going to happen overnight for things to right themselves. But it's certainly going to be interesting. We're living in interesting times, and well, keep your eye out, and if you can, attempt to take back responsibility for every aspect of your own life from government. Bye bye.